Hi there, it's Thomas George, and thank you for joining me in this video where we're going to be looking at the essentials of writing a chord progression, a bass part, and also a drum beat. So in this video, I will be using the software Logic Pro 10. However, the tips and techniques I teach you should be applicable on any digital audio workstation. Also, these videos were taken from my Music Production 101 course. To gain full access to this course, just check out the description below. Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at creating a song from scratch. So when you're writing a song, there's loads of different ways you can start. You can start with a chord progression, you can start with a melody, you can start with a drum beat, or you can start with a bass line. I'm going to show you in this lecture how you can start writing a song from a chord progression. So a chord progression is basically just a series of chords that go together and they can be looped round and round. The good thing about starting with a chord progression is you can quickly find the notes for the melodies and for other parts of the song by just looking at the chords. A lot of the time, when you change a chord progression or you change a chord, the melody will also change with it. So the notes will fit in the next chord. There are loads of different chord progressions, but in modern music or popular music, often people do seem to use the same chord progressions. You can't copyright a chord progression as well. As long as the song sounds different, you can use popular chord progressions. So I've actually just Googled popular chord progressions, and these are the ones that have come up. So here we have 1, 6, 1, 5. So when you see the Roman numerals like this is just the way people write chord progressions. So maybe just think of a Roman numeral clock. But if you're playing in C major, which you're actually going to write this song in, it's basically just the white notes. It's really easy to play along with in C major. So this will be C, F, C, and G. And then we have another chord progression below, which is 1, 5, 6, 4. So in C major, if you count up the notes, 1, 5, 6, 4. And then we have the other one, which is 1, 6, 2, 5. I'm just playing the notes at the moment. We'll actually need to work out how to play these chords. You'll notice we have these uppercase Roman numerals and these lowercase Roman numerals. So the uppercase Roman numeral means a major chord, and a lowercase Roman numeral like this means a minor chord. So I'm just going to quickly tell you how to work out a major chord and then a minor chord, and then we're actually going to write out some of these different chord progressions and use them for a song. So in this digital audio workstation, we can open up a piano roll editor, and in all popular digital audio workstations, you will have a piano roll editor as well, where you can actually write in the MIDI information. So let's actually have a look at the difference between a major chord and a minor chord. So let's start on the note C. So if you look on the keyboard here, it's actually labeled C. And you'll notice we have 2 of these black notes and then 3 of these black notes. And C is just the white note that's to the left of the 2 black notes, which is here. Okay, so for a C chord, a major or a minor chord, it will have a C. And then a major and a minor chord will both have the 5th of the note. So all we need to do is count up 5 notes. And in this scale, C major is just the white notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is this one here, a G. Every major and minor chord has 3 notes, which is also known as a triad. And the difference between a major and a minor chord is this 3rd note here. So let's actually play in the 3rd for a major chord. We have a little pattern to work this out. We can just count up 5 notes, including the 1st note, to find the 3rd. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this one here, which is an E. Remember, all the notes in C major are white. So this here is the 3rd. And then to change it to a minor chord, all we need to do is just flatten it 1 step. And that makes it a minor chord. You can probably hear it sounds quite moody. And if we sharpen this again, back to a major chord, you can probably hear it sounds a bit happier. So a simple way to actually notice the difference between a major chord and a minor chord is a minor chord sounds a bit more sad and a major chord sounds happier. So for this, we're going to be using a C major chord. So you can see here, we have a C. So remember, 5 notes count up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this one here, this means a C major. And for a minor, we just count up 4 notes as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be a minor or just a major chord. with the third flattened. Okay, so that's how we can quickly work out the difference between a major and a minor. So let's have a look at this second chord progression here. 1, 5, 6, 4. So now let's actually type in this next one, which is a 5. So it's a capital V like this, or a G, in this case in C major. So this means a G major chord. So let's go down here to a G. You can see here, this is a G. C, D, E, F, G, just all the white notes, count up. Okay, so here is the G. Let's just zoom in. Okay, and remember this is a major chord. We used that pattern we used before, count up 5, including the first note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is the major third. Because we're in C major, like I said, just the white notes, we know it's in key, which means the notes fit in the scale because it's a white note. So let's just type it in this B now. And also remember, a major and a minor chord both use the same fifth notes because a triad, like I said before, is the root, the third, and the fifth. So let's just count up 5 from this G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's this note here, which is a D. So here we have two chords. We have the C major and now the G major. Let's just hear these both back. Okay, great. Now we're going to have a look at the next chord, which is the small one here, which is a 6. Also, in this key, it's going to be an A minor. So remember, there's a difference between a major and a minor chord. This will give a different kind of sound. If you're just using major chords all of the time, it's not going to sound as interesting as if you use some other types of chords, such as a minor chord. So remember, we can count up in the scale. C, D, E, F, G, A. So let's use this note here, A. Okay, and now let's add the fifth, because in a major and a minor chord, they both have the same fifth. So let's just count up 5 of these white notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This note here, which is an E. So let's now add the third. Let's count up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gives us this note here, which isn't a white note. This is actually the major note. So remember, we need to drop it down a step. Now it's minor. So we can either add the third like that, which is a major third, then drop it down a half step, or just one note on the keyboard, and this will make it a minor chord. Or we can just count up 4 notes, including the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the minor. If we count up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's major, but this note here, this is not in the scale. We're in C major, which is just the white notes. So it needs to be this note here, which is a C, which makes it A minor. Okay, we've got one more chord to go in this chord progression, and this is an F. So remember from before, let's count up until we find an F. C, D, E, F. Okay, so let's add that note in. You can tell instantly that wasn't the right note. You can hear, it doesn't quite sound right. It doesn't sound like the other chords. That's because that was an F sharp. You can see here it's the black note. So be careful when you're typing in notes. Make sure you use the right notes for your scale. So here we have F. And then this is an F major chord. So let's put the fifth in first, because the fifth is the same for the major and the minor. All we need to do is count up 5 notes in the scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here we have a C. We actually used the C before, but we can play it again. It's absolutely fine. And then we have the third. Remember, this is an F major chord. So let's count up 5 notes, including the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And A again. And here we have the third, which is an A. So this is a F major chord. Okay, so now we're actually going to play this chord progression back. So I'm just going to loop this. So you've probably heard this chord progression loads of times in popular music. One more thing I'm going to do now is actually add some inversions. You'll notice now when we play it back, it sounds a bit clunky. It jumps to one chord to another. It doesn't sound very smooth. So what we can do is actually just change the octaves of some of these chords. So on the piano keyboard, for example, the note C, there's a C here, there's a C octave above, another C, another octave above, and so on and so forth. So we have the same notes but in different octaves, which are just 12 notes above, or also known as an octave. So what we can do is just change some of these notes around, move them up and down the octaves so they sound a bit smoother, because here you can see there's this big jump between the C and this G. If we move this G up here, it'll sound a lot smoother, and it's actually the same note as before, so we won't get that big jump. So I'm just going to change some of these octaves around so it sounds a bit smoother. When we add the bass line later on, it will still sound like the chord. At the moment, we're changing something called the root note, but when we add the bass later on, this will reaffirm the root note as well, and the chords will sound absolutely great. But for now, let's just change these octaves around so they're the same note, just different octaves so they don't sound as jumpy. So I'm actually going to put this G up an octave. Okay, going along. I might even put this A up an octave. And then here, this note definitely needs to go up an octave. So this F, maybe I could even put this A up an octave if I wanted to. Now you can see it just looks a lot smoother. And let's play this back and it shouldn't sound as jumpy. Okay, that sounds a lot better. And when we add the bass line next, we're going to have a nice chord progression with a solid bass part. Okay, so that's how you can start writing a song with a chord progression. I do recommend actually going through these other chord progressions as well. I'm just using this one as an example, but I do recommend going into your digital audio workstation and working out the chords for this one, which is 1, 6, 4, 5, and 1, 6, 2, 5, and an easy one up here, which is just major chords, which is 1, 4, 1, 5. I hope you found this lecture useful. In the next lecture, we're going to look at adding a bass part to this song. Thank you for watching. Hello and welcome to this lecture, where we're going to be looking at adding a bass part to our chord progression. Previously, we wrote out these chords, and the chord progression was 1, 5, 6, 4. And in this key, which is C major, which is all the white notes, it's C, G, A minor, and F. So what we did is actually rearrange some of these notes by using inversions. So it's basically just changing the octaves around so the chords sound a bit smoother. Let's just have a quick listen to this chord progression again, and then we're going to add a bass part. Okay, nice and simple, very common chord progression. And now we're going to add a bass part. Now let's actually copy over this MIDI information to the bass, and let's open this up. So you remember we did change the order of some of these notes. So going back to here, we have 1. So in this case, it's a C. And with a bass part, we want it lower than this. We want a low, solid note to make the soundscape a bit fuller. So let's put this down an octave. And the next one, we have a G. That isn't a G because remember, we used inversions. We changed the order of the notes. So let's find a G here. So we have C, D, E, F, G, this one here. Let's put this down 2 octaves actually. Oh, maybe too low, just 1 octave. Here we go. We don't want it too low or it will just rumble and sound a bit messy, but we don't want it too high because we do want that low bass sound. So I'm actually just going to mute these other notes because we might be looking at them later on. Okay, the next chord is an A minor. So this note here is an A. If we count up in C, C, D, E, F, G, A. Remember, we changed the order with inversions. So let's just drop this down an octave. And mute these other notes. And then we have the chord here, which is an F. So go from C, C, D, E, F, this note here. Drop this an octave as well. And mute these other notes. Now let's play these chords back with these bass notes, and it should sound a lot fuller and deeper and just make a lot more sense of the bass notes as well, because when we're using inversions, we're swapping the order of the notes, we're kind of losing that root position, and the bass reaffirms that root position, so we will really want a bass just to make our chords stand out stronger and sound a lot more powerful. At the moment, there's not that much movement. The bass has a few different roles. It's not just about adding that lower note in the harmony. It's also about adding movement. The bass guitar is a rhythmical instrument, so we're going to add some rhythm here. There's a few different tricks and tips we can actually do. We can actually add something called an arpeggiator. So what an arpeggiator does is it plays all the different notes in the chord, but when there's just one note like this, it just repeats the note, and it kind of sounds like someone's playing the bass with a plectrum or pick. So we can actually type this in the MIDI information like this, or we can just use an arpeggiator. Most digital audio workstations will have an arpeggiator. I'll show you how to do this first. It's a quick and easy way of adding some movement to your bass notes. Then after, we'll have a look in this MIDI editor and then manually add some movement in. So in this digital audio workstation, which is Logic Pro, we can easily add an arpeggiator. In your DAW, there should be a quick and easy way to add an arpeggiator as well. So I'm actually going to change this to 8th notes. So you can instantly hear now, it kind of sounds like that rock style bass when they're using a pick, just by adding an arpeggiator. And that is literally just adding an arpeggiator onto these single notes. You can add movement quickly. We can, of course, turn off this arpeggiator and actually add this in manually if we wish. So that was actually playing 8th notes. So you notice in the bar here, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. It's every beat of the bar. So in 4/4, this time signature we're in. So we have 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the bar. And 8th notes is just 2 of these notes every beat. So let's just copy these over, make sure it's in the right place. And if you do make a mistake, you can always use something called quantize, which should move the notes to the closest amount that you set. So let's play this back now. There we go, same thing as playing the arpeggiator. But I'm actually just going to use the arpeggiator for now because it's just a really quick and easy way of just adding some movement to your bass. So let's turn the arpeggiator back on. Now what we're going to do is add some passing notes to this bass part. So when you're playing the bass, think of the bass guitar when you go between one chord and another. Just to make it sound a bit smoother, you can add passing notes. So if there's a big jump between the different notes, you can add notes in between this to make it sound a bit smoother and, to be honest, a lot more exciting. So you might notice here there's a big jump between these two notes here, between this C and this G. So we can add a passing note. Really though, when we're adding a passing note, we can use notes that aren't in the chord or the scale as a passing note if it's quick. But just to be safe, we're going to use one of these notes here, which are the notes from this first chord, which is a C major. So we have this note here, which is an E, and this one here, which is a G. So the second note is a G, so I wouldn't really use a G before, but we can just add an E beforehand, just as a passing note, add a bit more movement to make it sound a bit smoother rather than having this big jump at the start. So let's put this back to about here. And now let's add in this E note. And just change the size. You can see in the bar here, it's the second half of the quarter note. So it's an 8th note, and the arpeggiator is set to play 8th notes. So it's just going to play this note once. So let's play this section back, and you'll be able to hear this passing note before it goes to the note G. There you go, it makes the bass sound a bit more interesting, and it stops that big jump happening. So let's go along. This here between G and A, this is quite a small distance, so we don't really need a passing note here. Here between A and F, we could, if we wanted to, add a passing note. So let's add one here as well. The jump isn't too big, but just for this example, we're going to add one. Okay, so let's actually look at this chord here, which is an A minor. So these notes here is a C and an E. So here we already have a C. So you notice here that in this distance here, we only really have a G. We could go up if we wanted to and go to this note here, which is a C. It won't make the distance sound smoother, but it could make it sound a bit more interesting. So let's just add a C here. And let's just hear this section. That works, but to be honest, I'm not going to have a passing note here because I just want to make the jumps of the distance sound a bit smoother. And going back to the start, we have this C here as well. And the distance between this first note and the last note is pretty big. So the distance between this C and this F, I would add a passing note at the end as well. So between C and F, it's a big distance. So at the end, I'm going to add a passing note here as well. You could add a C, but we are going to be going to the note C, so I might not add that because we're going to that note anyway. In the chord of F, you can see up here, as we used before, which is the major third, which is an A. We could also add that as well if we wanted to. To do that though, we will have to jump up again, which will make the jump even bigger, or we can jump down. So with this, it's still a big distance. Even if we have the A, we've still got an even bigger jump now if we have the A up or the A down an octave. So what I'm going to do now is add another note, this time not one that's in this triad, not one that's in these three notes. Remember, we're in the scale of C major, which is all the white notes. So there are certain notes that fit better than others, even though all the white notes technically do fit. So I'm actually going to use one of the notes from the C major chord. So if you look at C major, we have a C, then we have an E, then we have a G. So let's have a look at this now. So we could have an E going down, but that is a semitone difference. So we can get a bit of clashing when we use semitones like that. So I'm actually going to jump up to the note G. So we have a bit of movement, and it's not quite as high as the note A. So let's add that now as well. And let's hear what this section sounds like, going from this last chord to the first chord. Because for any chord progression, you want to make the loop work. You want to make it go round and round and round and sound seamless. Okay, so there we added a note from the other chord. Technically still fits in this chord before, but we can also experiment with other notes. This is just a way of adding a bit of movement to your bass parts. So we've added rhythm with the arpeggiator, and we've added different notes with something called a passing note. So that's just a quick and easy way of adding a bass part. So having a bass part will add that thicker, lower harmony, and will also add some movement to your song. So in the next lecture, we're going to continue looking at writing a song. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello, welcome to this lecture, where we're going to be looking at programming in a drum beat. So previously we wrote a chord progression and a bass line. Let's just have a listen to this now. Okay, nice and simple. We have some movement from the bass, and now we're going to actually program in a drum part. Okay, you'll notice on here we actually have the names of the different drums, or you can just go along either with your MIDI keyboard and find the different drums, or you can just hit the piano keys on the side or type in the MIDI information to find the different drum parts. So with this, we're going to actually start off with the kick drum, which is down here, C1, which is kick. Normally, the kick will be on C1, but experiment around and find yourself a nice sounding kick. So we want to find a kick sample or a drum kit that really fits with the song. So if you're making maybe a dance music song, find yourself an appropriate kick. If you're making more of a pop or a rock song, similar to this, perhaps, find a more organic sounding kick, but it really depends on what you're after. So let's just zoom in. Let's go down to C1, the kick here. And I'm just going to type in a really, really simple drum beat to start with. We can always go through and experiment and change the drum beat around later on, but for now, I'm going to keep it super simple. So this, I'm going to have the kick on every beat. So we're in 4/4 here, and in 4/4, we have 4 crotchets or 4 quarter notes in a bar. So I'm just going to add a kick drum every single beat. And let's just play this back. There you go, really simple, kick on every beat. And now I'm going to add the snare on 2 and 4. So 1, snare, 3, snare. So the 2 and the 4 will have a snare and a kick. Really, really simple way of doing this. Of course, we're going to change this around later on, but for now, let's just have the snare on 2 and 4. So normally the snare will be on a D1. We can also use a hand clap as well if you want. There's different types of snares, but go through and find the right snare. But for this, I'm actually going to use a snare and a hand clap at the same time. So on 2 and 4, we have the snare and the clap. Let's play this back. Okay, very, very simple. And now in between this, we want some hi-hats. So we can have an open hi-hat or a closed hi-hat. So with this one, we have two different types of closed hi-hats and open hi-hat. But for this, I'm just going to use a closed hi-hat and then an open hi-hat. With this, I'm going to have the closed hi-hat on every 8th note, and then an open hi-hat at the end, just to add a bit of variation. And this one here, just an open hi-hat. So this is just a really, really simple drum beat. We will change this later on, make it a bit more interesting, but for now, let's hear the super simple drum beat. As you remember, kick on every beat, snare on 2 and 4, and then hi-hats every 8th note, and the last hi-hat is an open hi-hat. And this last hi-hat will actually be choked, which means you'll hear this open sound, but as soon as it loops around and you hear this closed hi-hat, you won't hear the open sound anymore. So let's just create a loop, and then you'll hear the choking of this hi-hat. So now we're actually going to continue with the drum beat, but the second time round, we're going to make it a little bit different. So what we can do is just select all this and then paste it. But this time, we're going to change it slightly. So what I'm going to do is move this kick drum and then actually add another kick drum, not on the beat, just to make it sound a bit different. So let's just hear the second part. So we have a little bit more variation, a little bit more movement. We can even add another snare at the end. There we go, a bit of a variation, so it's not just the same all the way through. I'm actually going to add the hi-hat again because we seem to have lost that while we were editing. So make sure you go through and just check that everything is in the right place. Okay, so I'm going to copy over these two sections again. This time, I'm actually going to add a different fill on the 4th bar. So bar 1, we have the simple drum beat. Bar 2, we have the variation of this drum beat. Bar 3, we have the simple drum beat again. And bar 4, I'm going to change this again, just to make it even more interesting. You may have noticed before, when I added this open hi-hat, we heard a tom sound. So we have a few different tom sounds. We have this mid tom, and a high tom, another high tom. So I'm actually going to use some high toms to add a fill. So just every 8th note, I'm going to add some toms. And we're going to get rid of this open hi-hats. I'm going to use a low tom here, and then back to the high tom. So we have two different high toms, a low tom, and I'm going to actually get rid of this snare as well. And also when we finish this loop, I want to have a crash, a cymbal, so we know it's the start of the loop. So I'm going to go back to the first loop. This time, instead of the hi-hat closed, I'm going to add a cymbal. So let's go up here and find a cymbal. So we have a ride cymbal, and we have a crash. It's the crash that I really want. So let's go up to the crash so people know it's the start of the loop. Let's actually hear bar 4 with this new tom-tom fill, and then I'm going to turn on the loop and you'll hear the crash and it'll loop back to the first bar. Okay, great. Now what I'm going to do is just make this first and the third loop a little bit different. Now I think it's just too simple and too boring. So I'm just going to add a kick drum, just move it around slightly. And then I may add another open hi-hat around about here. Okay, so we've just got open hi-hat and I've added another kick drum just to add a bit more movement. I'm going to have this almost the same for bar 3. Remember, extra kick drum and open hi-hat on beat 3. So let's go to bar 3. And then this was a open hi-hat. This time, I'm just going to change this a little bit, move this kick here, just so it's slightly different. So it sounds similar, the listener thinks it's almost the same, but there's a very slight variation just to make it sound more interesting. Because if we have the same drums over and over again, it's going to sound a bit boring and repetitive. However, if they're completely crazy and different all of the time, the listener may get a bit confused because you do want consistency in your music as well. So this way we have it a bit more interesting, but it also sounds like a consistent, solid drum beat. So let's have a listen to this loop now with all of the different parts. Okay, now we can just go through and tweak some sounds around. I'm actually going to change this open hi-hat to maybe 2 tom sounds instead, just to make it a bit more interesting. And on bar 3, I'm going to change this to toms as well, but slightly different tom drums, so it sounds a little different, but the rhythm's the same. Okay, so I'm happy with this drum beat now. It works with the song. It sounds consistent, but it's not the same all the way through. I do recommend going through and experimenting. You can use this drum beat, copy this drum beat if you want, and then go through and change parts around, make it sound a bit more interesting, and try and make it sound unique. Okay, so let's have a listen to this loop now, with the drums, the chords, and the bass part. Okay, great. So that's how you can quickly write a drum beat. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, so there we go. That's the end of this video. I hope you found it useful. If you have, be sure to give it a like. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. Also, these videos were taken from my Music Production 101 course. If you'd like to gain full access to this course, just check out the description below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.